The word struck her like a blade drawn across silk, clean and devastating and utterly public. "You're not worth choosing." Hadrian Voss delivered the verdict with the casual cruelty of a man discarding a wilted flower, his voice pitched just loud enough for the cluster of guests nearby to hear. The ballroom of Whitmore House continued its glittering dance around them, but Carenza Ashford felt the ripple of attention spreading outward like poison in still water. Her lungs forgot how to function. She stood frozen in her borrowed gown of pale silver, a dress her mother had altered 3 times to fit properly, her gloved hands still extended in the gesture of reaching for him. For the man who had courted her for 4 months, the man who had whispered promises in moonlit gardens and sent letters sealed with crimson wax. The man who had told her, just last week, that he intended to speak with her father about a formal arrangement. Now he looked at her as if she were a stranger who had presumed too much. "Hadrian," she breathed, hating the tremor in her voice. "I don't understand. You said—" "I said many things." He adjusted his cravat with manicured fingers, his handsome face arranged in an expression of bored inconvenience. "Surely you didn't think I was serious? A man of my position, aligning himself with a family drowning in debt?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You were a diversion, Miss Ashford, a pleasant way to pass the time until someone suitable presented herself." The whispers swelled around her now, a symphony of scandal. She could feel the heat of 100 gazes pressing against her skin. I could see the flutter of fans raised to conceal delighted smiles. The Ashford girl, publicly humiliated. What entertainment for a Tuesday evening. Her brother Silas was somewhere in this ballroom. Her mother had remained home, too ill for social engagements. Thank God for that small mercy. At least her mother would not witness this destruction firsthand. "Someone suitable," Carenza repeated, her voice hollow. Hadrian's smile widened, displaying perfect teeth. "Lady Sabine Harcourt has agreed to receive my courtship. Her father's estates border mine quite conveniently, and her dowry is substantial." He leaned closer, dropping his voice to a theatrical whisper that still carried to eager ears. "You must understand, darling. When a man looks at his future, he must see profit, not charity." Something cracked inside her chest, not her heart. That would be too simple, too romantic. This was something deeper. Pride, perhaps, or the last fragile thread of hope she had carried since her father's investments collapsed 2 years ago, taking everything they owned except the crumbling townhouse and the Ashford name. She should curtsy and retreat. She should gather the shreds of her dignity and disappear into the crowd before the gossip calcified into permanent ruin. That was what a sensible woman would do. Carenza had never excelled at being sensible. "You courted me knowing you had no intention of honoring your words," she said, and her voice emerged steadier now, sharpened by something cold and bright. "You let me believe. You let my family believe. Your family believed what they wished to believe." Hadrian waved a dismissive hand. "I made no formal promises. If you constructed fantasies from ordinary pleasantries, that is hardly my fault. You spoke of marriage. I spoke of many things. I speak to my horse quite passionately as well. That doesn't mean I intend to wed the creature." Laughter rippled through the assembled witnesses. Carenza felt her face burn, felt the hot pressure of tears she absolutely refused to release. Not here. Not in front of these vultures in their silks and jewels, watching her devastation like it was the evening's entertainment. She opened her mouth to respond, though what she intended to say she never discovered. Because at that precise moment, a new voice cut through the murmurs like a sword through gossamer. "Fascinating logic, Voss. Though I wonder if your horse appreciates the comparison to Miss Ashford. I suspect the horse has rather more dignity." The crowd parted. Carenza turned, her breath catching, and found herself staring at a man she had noticed earlier, but never expected to approach. He stood taller than Hadrian by several inches, broad-shouldered beneath an impeccably tailored coat of midnight blue. His dark hair was swept back from a face that balanced aristocratic severity with an unexpected warmth around the eyes the color of aged whiskey, amber and deep and currently fixed on Hadrian Voss with unmistakable contempt. The whispers shifted tenor, transforming from scandal to astonishment. "Your Grace," Hadrian said, and the confidence in his voice wavered almost imperceptibly. "I didn't realize you were attending this evening." "Evidently not," the stranger replied. Or I suspect you might have conducted your cruelty with slightly more discretion." "Your Grace," the title registered dimly through Carenza's shock. This was a duke. A duke had just publicly rebuked Hadrian Voss on her behalf. The stranger turned to face her fully, and the weight of his attention was startling. Not invasive, but thorough, as if he were cataloging details others might miss. The slight unraveling of a curl at her temple, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands had curled into fists at her sides, fingernails pressing crescents into her palms through her thin gloves. "Miss Ashford," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine. "I believe you promised me the next waltz." She had promised him nothing. She had never spoken a single word to this man in her life, but his eyes held hers with a message as clear as printed text. "Play along, and I will get you out of this." Carenza understood then that she had two choices: refuse and remain here to be picked apart by scandal-hungry guests who would dine on her humiliation for weeks, or accept the hand of a stranger whose name she didn't even know and follow him into whatever came next. She had spent 2 years being sensible, being careful, being the dutiful daughter who counted pennies and wore last season's fashions and pretended not to notice when former friends crossed the street to avoid her family's misfortune. Where had sensible gotten her? Standing in a ballroom, publicly discarded like refuse. Carenza placed her hand in the Duke's outstretched palm. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said, somehow keeping her voice steady. "The evening's events quite distracted me. I am ready now." Something flickered in his amber eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, nodded once to Hadrian Voss, a dismissal so casual it bordered on insulting, and guided her away from the wreckage of her former hopes. Behind them, the whispers ignited into wildfire, and Carenza Ashford walked into the unknown beside a man whose very touch felt like the beginning of something dangerous. The waltz began, and Carenza discovered that the Duke moved like water over stone, fluid, assured, and impossible to predict. His hand at her waist was proper in placement, but warm enough to feel through the layers of her gown, and she found herself following his lead without conscious thought, her body responding to cues her mind was too scattered to process. "Don't breathe," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You look like you're approaching an execution rather than a dance." "Perhaps I am." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I don't even know your name, Your Grace. Only that you've just made yourself part of a scandal that will be all over London by morning. Alaric Vane, Duke of Ashworth." He turned her smoothly, guiding them through the other couples with practiced ease. "And I was already part of several scandals. One more hardly signifies. Alaric Vane." Even the name carried weight, a heaviness of history and title that made Carenza acutely aware of her borrowed dress and her family's debts, and the vast, impossible gulf between their stations. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why intervene? You don't know me. Well, you have no reason to involve yourself in Hadrian Voss's casual destruction of an innocent woman." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I have my reasons. Which are? None of your concern at present. It was not an answer, and they both knew it. But before Carenza could press further, she caught sight of something that made her stomach plunge toward the polished floor. Lady Sabine Harcourt stood at the edge of the dance floor, resplendent in rose-colored silk, watching their waltz with undisguised fury. Beside her, an older woman in severe black whispered urgently into her ear, presumably her mother, given the matching expressions of calculated displeasure. But it was not Lady Sabine who seized Carenza's attention. It was the cluster of women forming behind her. The Countess of Whitmore, their hostess, saw her face arranged in careful neutrality. Mrs. Pemberton, known throughout society for her vicious tongue. Lady Adele Crane, whose husband managed half the gossip sheets in London. They were gathering, circling, preparing. "They're going to intercept us when the dance ends," Carenza said quietly. "They'll want to know who I am, what claim I have on your attention. And when they discover the truth, they'll discover nothing but what I choose to tell them." The music swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, couples slowed and separated, the ritual of the waltz reaching its inevitable end. Carenza felt panic rising in her throat, sharp and metallic. "Your Grace, I appreciate the rescue, truly I do. But this cannot end well. I should simply leave. Find my brother, and make our excuses. And give them exactly what they expect." Alaric's hand tightened fractionally at her waist, holding her in position as the final notes faded. "Give Voss the satisfaction of watching you flee?" "No." "Then what do you suggest? I cannot pretend to be something I am not. My family's circumstances are well known. The moment they start asking questions, they will ask questions of me," he interrupted smoothly. "And I will provide answers. Follow my lead, Miss Ashford. You've done admirably so far." She wanted to argue. Every rational thought screamed that she should extract herself from this situation before it spiraled further beyond her control. But the alternative was surrender, slinking away in defeat, while Hadrian Voss watched and smiled and congratulated himself on escaping an unsuitable attachment. Such Carenza had survived 2 years of reduced circumstances, pitying glances, and closed doors. She had endured watching her father retreat into silence and her mother pretend that mending other people's clothes was merely a pleasant hobby. She had smiled through humiliation more times than she could count. But something about tonight, about Hadrian's casual cruelty, about this stranger's unexpected intervention, had ignited a spark she thought had long since been extinguished. "Very well," she said quietly. "I'll follow your lead." The waltz ended. They separated with proper formality, his bow matching her curtsy with geometric precision. And then the wolves descended. "Your Grace," the Countess of Whitmore arrived first, her smile bright and predatory. "What a delightful surprise to see you dancing this evening. I had quite given up hope you would grace my humble ball with such participation." "Lady Whitmore," Alaric inclined his head with cool politeness. The music proved irresistible. Evidently, her gaze slid to Carenza, assessing and sharp. "I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting your companion, though she does seem familiar. Have we been introduced, my dear?" Before Carenza could respond, Mrs. Pemberton inserted herself into the conversation with the subtlety of a siege weapon. "Ashford, isn't it? I thought I recognized the gown. Did your mother not wear something similar to the Haverton Assembly 3 seasons past? How resourceful of you to revive it." The barb landed precisely where intended. Carenza felt heat climb her neck, but kept her expression neutral. "My mother has excellent taste," she replied evenly. "But good fashion transcends the tyranny of seasons." Mrs. Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "Miss Ashford," Alaric said, his voice cutting through the mounting tension like a blade through silk. is a particular friend of my sister Linnea. They met during Linnea's recovery in Bath last autumn and have maintained a devoted correspondence ever since. She's graciously agreed to visit Ashworth Hall as Linnea's guest for the remainder of the season. The words dropped into the gathering like stones into still water. Ripples of surprise spread outward, recalculating, reassessing. Carenza kept her face carefully still, even as her mind reeled. She had never met any Linnea. She had never received correspondence from anyone at Ashworth Hall. The Duke was constructing an elaborate fiction from whole cloth, and she had no choice but to support it. "How lovely," Lady Whitmore said slowly, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. "I wasn't aware Lady Linnea had formed such close attachments during her Bath sojourn." "My sister is full of surprises." Alaric's smile held no warmth. "As am I. Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Ashford has had a trying evening, and I promised Linnea I would ensure her friend was not overtaxed by social obligations." He offered Carenza his arm, and she took it with a gratitude she could not voice. Together, they walked away from the cluster of bewildered society matrons, away from the whispers and the stares and the wreckage of the evening. They did not stop until they reached a small alcove near the terrace doors, partially shielded from view by an arrangement of potted palms. Only then did Alaric release her arm and turn to face her fully. "North, you have questions," he said. It was not a question. "I have dozens." Carenza pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to calm the trembling that had begun the moment they stopped moving. "Starting with why you've just told half of London society a collection of elaborate lies about a woman you met 10 minutes ago." "Because I need something from you, Miss Ashford." His whiskey-colored gaze held hers, unblinking and intense. "And I believe after tonight, you might need something from me as well." The words hung between them, weighted with implication. "What could you possibly need from me?" Carenza asked slowly. "I have nothing. No fortune, no connections, no influence. As Hadrian so eloquently noted, I am not worth choosing." Something flickered across Alaric's face. Anger, perhaps, though not directed at her. Hadrian Voss is a fool who measures worth in ledger books. His opinion is irrelevant." "His opinion just destroyed what remained of my reputation." "His opinion?" Alaric countered. "Gave me an opportunity I've been waiting 3 weeks to find." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a murmur that sent inexplicable shivers down her spine. "I need a woman who society believes I'm courting. Someone convincing enough to deflect the relentless matchmaking of my aunt and the expectations of half the ton. Someone intelligent enough to navigate the performance, but unknown enough to disappear when the charade concludes." Carenza stared at him. "You want me to pretend to be your romantic interest?" "I want you to stay at Ashworth Hall as my sister's guest, which you now publicly are, thanks to my announcement, and allow society to draw its own conclusions about our association." His jaw tightened. "In exchange, you'll have comfort, security, and when this ends, references and connections that will open doors currently closed to you." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "Why me? There must be dozens of women who would—" "There are dozens of women who would expect the performance to become reality." Alaric's voice went flat. "Who would see this as a path to becoming the next Duchess of Ashworth? You, Miss Ashford, have just been publicly and humiliatingly informed that you are not worth choosing. No one, least of all you, would believe a man like me would genuinely pursue a woman in your circumstances." The brutal honesty of it stole her breath. "You need me," she said slowly, "because I'm ruined. Because no one would believe you actually want me. I need you because you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. As do I." The ballroom continued its glittering dance beyond their alcove. Somewhere out there, Hadrian Voss was probably celebrating his narrow escape. Lady Sabine Harcourt was probably already planning her triumphant engagement announcement. And Carenza's brother Silas was probably searching for her, worried and confused, and utterly unaware that his sister was standing in an alcove receiving the most outrageous proposition of her life. She should refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was madness, that agreeing to such an arrangement would only lead to greater disaster. She was a merchant's daughter, with a ruined reputation and empty pockets. He was a duke who moved through society like a blade through water. But where had caution gotten her, standing in a ballroom, publicly discarded like refuse? "If I agree," she said carefully, "I have conditions." Something shifted in Alaric's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "Name them." Carenza's pulse raced against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. She had learned, in these 2 years of reduced circumstances, that desperation was a weakness others would exploit. Whatever this man wanted from her, she would not give it cheaply. "First," she said, "my mother must be informed. Properly, respectfully, with a letter that explains I've accepted a position as Lady Linnea's companion for the season. No mention of courtships or arrangements. She's been ill, and I won't have her worrying about rumors she cannot investigate. Reasonable." Alaric nodded once. "Continue." "Second, when this arrangement ends, however it ends, I want references. Letters of introduction from your sister, from any respectable connections she can provide. I have no intention of returning to the life I'm currently living. I need doors opened that are presently sealed against me. Also reasonable, though more complex to execute. What else?" Carenza lifted her chin, meeting his amber gaze with a directness that felt reckless. "Third, and most importantly, the moment you decide to pursue a real courtship with any woman, this ends immediately. I don't care if it's Lady Sabine Harcourt or the Queen herself. I will not be used as a shield while you conduct genuine romantic business behind my back. I have been made a fool once tonight. I will not allow it to happen again." The silence that followed her words stretched taut as a bowstring. Alaric studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, his expression unreadable. She wondered if she had overstepped, if her conditions had transformed her from useful to troublesome. Perhaps he would simply retract his offer and leave her to navigate the wreckage of the evening alone. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "You have my word," he said. "All 3 conditions. Do we have an agreement, Miss Ashford?" She looked at his outstretched hand, elegant, powerful, belonging to a world that had never welcomed her, and likely never would. She thought of her mother, bent over mending at midnight, her father, silent in his study, drowning in guilt he could not voice, her brother Silas, whose optimism had survived every setback, but whose schemes never quite succeeded. She thought of Hadrian Voss, his beautiful face twisted with contempt. "You're not worth choosing." Carenza took the Duke's hand. "We have an agreement." His grip was warm and firm, sealing a bargain that felt less like a business arrangement and more like stepping off a cliff into unknown darkness. When he released her hand, she felt oddly bereft. "The carriage will be brought around," Alaric said, already shifting into practical mode. "You'll need to collect your brother. I assume the young man currently scanning the ballroom with increasing panic." "Is your relation?" Carenza turned to see Silas weaving through the crowd, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. He had clearly heard enough gossip to understand something significant had occurred, but lacked the details to make sense of it. "Yes, that's Silas. Inform him that you've accepted an invitation to visit Ashworth Hall. Keep the explanation simple. A friendship with my sister, an opportunity too valuable to refuse. He doesn't need to know the particulars. He'll have questions. Then give him answers that satisfy without illuminating." Alaric's tone was matter-of-fact, as if he routinely orchestrated elaborate deceptions. Perhaps he did. My sister Linnea will genuinely enjoy your company. She's been starved for companionship since our father's death 8 months ago, and the aunt who now manages our household is not known for her warmth. Whatever fiction we construct for society, the friendship between you and Linnea need not be performance. 8 months. His father dead only 8 months. Carenza filed the information away, recognizing grief in the careful flatness of his voice. "And your aunt?" she asked. "The one managing your household. She'll accept a stranger appearing on her doorstep?" "My aunt will accept whatever I tell her to accept." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Though, I won't pretend she'll be pleased. Lady Margot has spent the last 8 months attempting to arrange my marriage to suitable candidates of her choosing. Your arrival will complicate her plans considerably." "Wonderful. So I'll be walking into a household where the authority figure despises my presence." Carenza managed a thin smile. "That sounds familiar enough. Lady Margot doesn't despise anyone. She simply has strong opinions about propriety and lineage, and she expresses them with vigor." Alaric paused. "You should know that she'll investigate your background thoroughly. Every detail of your family's circumstances will be examined. There's nothing to hide. My father made bad investments. We lost everything except a crumbling townhouse and a name that used to mean something. It's humiliating, but it's not scandalous. Then you have nothing to fear from her scrutiny." Silas had spotted them now, and was making his way toward the alcove with determined strides. Carenza had perhaps 30 seconds before she would need to explain to her brother why she was standing in a secluded corner with the Duke of Ashworth. "One more thing," she said quickly. "You mentioned needing to deflect matchmaking from your aunt, but you haven't explained why. Most men in your position would simply choose a bride and be done with it." Alaric's expression shuddered like a window closing against cold wind. That is not a conversation for tonight. But it is a conversation we'll have. Perhaps." He stepped back, putting proper distance between them as Silas approached. "For now, focus on surviving the next hour. Collect your brother. Make your excuses to our hostess. By the time you reach the entrance hall, my carriage will be waiting. Tonight? You expect me to come to Ashworth Hall tonight? I expect you to seize the opportunity before society has time to solidify their narrative about this evening." His golden brown eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "Right now, they're confused. They saw Voss humiliate you, and then they saw me intervene. They don't know what to make of it. If you vanish into my household tonight, the confusion becomes mystery. Mystery becomes intrigue. And intrigue, Miss Ashford, so is far more useful than scandal." It was manipulative, calculated, and undeniably clever. Carenza found herself almost admiring the strategy, even as it swept her further from anything resembling solid ground. "Very well," she said quietly. "Tonight it is." Silas arrived breathless, his brown hair disheveled from pushing through crowds. "Carenza! What happened? I heard the most absurd rumors. Hadrian Voss? Something about choosing? And then someone said you were dancing with—" He stopped abruptly, finally registering the Duke's presence. "Your Grace, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Mr. Ashford." Alaric inclined his head with the precise courtesy owed to a gentleman of lesser rank. "Your sister and I were just concluding our conversation. She has graciously agreed to visit Ashworth Hall as a guest of my sister, Lady Linnea. I trust you'll ensure your mother receives appropriate notice of the arrangement." Silas blinked, visibly struggling to reconcile this information with whatever gossip he had collected. Yes, of course, Your Grace." The carriage was waiting, as promised. Within the hour, Carenza found herself rolling through darkened London streets toward a future she could not have imagined that morning. She had just agreed to something dangerous. She just didn't know yet how dangerous. The entrance hall of Ashworth Hall swallowed Carenza whole. She stood motionless on marble floors that gleamed like frozen moonlight, her borrowed silver gown suddenly feeling not merely inadequate, but almost offensive in its modesty. Above her, on a chandelier cascaded crystal tiers across a ceiling painted with scenes from mythology. Gods and goddesses frozen in eternal drama, their expressions serene despite the chaos surrounding them. Everything smelled of beeswax and flowers and something ancient, the accumulated scent of generations who had walked these halls with the unconscious confidence of people who belonged. Carenza did not belong. Every fiber of her being screamed this truth as servants materialized from shadows, moving with choreographed precision to take her cloak, offer refreshment, inquire after her comfort. Their faces were professionally neutral, but she felt their assessment regardless. The quick cataloging of her unfashionable dress, her simply arranged hair, the absence of jewels beyond the modest pearls her mother had given her on her 18th birthday. "So the ivory suite has been prepared for Miss Ashford," Alaric informed a severe-looking woman in black, who appeared to be the housekeeper. "She'll require a lady's maid as well. Someone experienced, but discreet." "Of course, Your Grace." The housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, Carenza would later learn, inclined her head with rigid formality. "I'll have Daphne assigned immediately, and inform Lady Linnea that her guest has arrived. I imagine she'll want to greet Miss Ashford personally." "Lady Linnea retired 2 hours ago, Your Grace. She was feeling fatigued." Concern crossed Alaric's face, quickly suppressed. "Then let her rest. The introductions can wait until morning." He turned to Carenza, and she was struck again by the peculiar intensity of his gaze, as if he were constantly calculating variables she couldn't perceive. "Mrs. Blackwood will see you to your rooms. We'll speak tomorrow about the particulars of our arrangement. For tonight, rest. You've had an eventful evening." It was a dismissal, polite but unmistakable. Carenza found herself curtsying automatically, her body falling back on the manners her mother had drilled into her since childhood. "Thank you, Your Grace, for everything." He nodded once, already turning away, and she watched him disappear through a doorway that led deeper into the house. The moment he vanished, the entrance hall felt colder, as if his presence had been generating heat she only noticed in its absence. "This way, Miss Ashford." Mrs. Blackwood led her up a grand staircase that swept in elegant curves toward the upper floors. Portraits lined the walls, generations of vanes staring down with expressions ranging from stern disapproval to mild bemusement. Carenza searched their faces for echoes of Alaric, and found them in the strong jaws and similar eyes that repeated through the centuries like a familial signature. "The family has occupied Ashworth Hall for 300 years, Mrs. Blackwood said, as if reading her thoughts. "The current structure was rebuilt after the fire of 1742, but the foundations date to the Tudor period. 300 years. Carenza's family had been merchants for 2 generations before her father's success elevated them to something approaching gentility. The Ashfords had no ancestral portraits, no grand staircases, no history etched in stone and blood, and centuries of accumulated power. The ivory suite lived up to its name. Soft cream walls, silk hangings in shades of pearl and blush, furniture that gleamed with careful polish and obvious expense. The bed alone was larger than the entire room Carenza shared with her mother's sewing supplies at home. "The wardrobe has been stocked with appropriate garments," Mrs. Blackwood continued, opening doors to reveal rows of gowns that made Carenza's head spin. Lady Linnea anticipated the need for a guest wardrobe some weeks ago. It seems she was confident her invitation would eventually be accepted. weeks ago, which meant either Linnea possessed some form of precognition, or the story Alaric had constructed about their friendship contained threads of truth Carenza didn't yet understand. "Daphne will attend you shortly." Mrs. Blackwood paused at the doorway, to her expression softening almost imperceptibly. "If I may speak frankly, Miss Ashford, this household has been quiet for too long. Lady Linnea has been lonely since the late Duke's passing. Whatever the circumstances of your arrival, I believe your presence will do her good." It was the first genuine warmth anyone in this house had shown her. Carenza felt her throat constrict unexpectedly. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood. I hope I can be a good friend to her." The housekeeper nodded and departed, leaving Carenza alone in a room that cost more than her family's annual income. She moved to the window, drawing aside gossamer curtains to reveal manicured gardens silvered by moonlight. Somewhere out there, beyond the immaculate hedges and sleeping flowers, London continued its endless churning of gossip and scandal. By now, the Whitmore ball would be winding toward its conclusion, and everyone who mattered would be discussing the extraordinary events of the evening. The Duke of Ashworth had publicly intervened when Hadrian Voss humiliated Miss Ashford. He had danced with her. He had announced her as a guest of his sister. And then, most shocking of all, he had spirited her away in his private carriage. What conclusions would society draw? What stories would crystallize from the chaos of rumor and speculation? Carenza pressed her forehead against the cool glass and tried to organize her scattered thoughts. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing for the Whitmore ball with cautious optimism, believing that Hadrian Voss was on the verge of proposing. She had imagined herself married by summer, established in a respectable household, finally able to help her family climb out of the pit of debt and diminished status that had swallowed them whole. Now Hadrian was gone, her reputation was in tatters, and she had somehow agreed to spend the season pretending to be courted by a duke she had met less than 3 hours ago. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The door opened to reveal a young woman with bright copper hair and a face full of freckles that seemed designed for smiling. "Miss Ashford? I'm Daphne. Mrs. Blackwood assigned me as your lady's maid." She bobbed a curtsy and entered with a tea tray. "I thought you might be hungry. The evening's been eventful, and there wasn't much time for eating, I'd imagine." The kindness was so unexpected that Carenza felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, too unwilling to cry in front of a stranger, regardless of how gently that stranger treated her. "Thank you, Daphne. That's very thoughtful." "Just practical, miss." Daphne set about arranging the tray on a small table near the fire. "You'll have a busy day tomorrow. Lady Linnea rises early when she's excited, and she's been talking of nothing but your arrival for weeks. Best you eat now and get some rest." There it was again. Weeks of anticipation for a friendship that didn't exist, for a guest who had been selected only hours ago through the strangest circumstances imaginable. "Daphne," Carenza said carefully, "what exactly has Lady Linnea been saying about my arrival?" The maid's hand stilled briefly over the teacups. "Just that she was expecting a friend from Bath, miss. Someone she'd grown fond of during her recovery. She didn't share many details." A pause. "Lady Linnea doesn't share many details about anything, really. She's private in her way. But she's been happier these past weeks, knowing you were coming. Whatever the full truth is, miss, and I'm not asking, that's not my place, I think you'll be good for her. Whatever the full truth is. So the servants, at least, suspected that the story was not as straightforward as it appeared. But they were choosing not to investigate, not to question. Whether out of loyalty to the family or simple pragmatism, Carenza couldn't tell. She sipped her tea and ate the delicate sandwiches Daphne had provided, tasting nothing through the fog of exhaustion and anxiety. When Daphne finally helped her into a nightgown of softer cotton than she had ever worn, Carenza crawled into the massive bed and stared at the canopy above her. Tomorrow she would meet Linnea, the sister whose friendship she was supposed to have cultivated in Bath. Tomorrow she would face Lady Margot, the aunt who managed this household with vigor and strong opinions about propriety. Tomorrow she would begin the performance that would define the next several months of her life. But tonight, in this beautiful room with its silk hangings and moonlit gardens, she could simply exist in the suspended moment between her old life and whatever came next. She fell asleep faster than she expected, dreaming of warm amber eyes and ballroom chandeliers and the sound of Hadrian's voice saying words she would never forgive. "You're not worth choosing." Morning arrived with the particular cruelty reserved for those who had slept poorly in unfamiliar surroundings. Carenza woke to find Daphne already moving about the room, laying out a morning dress of soft lavender that fit as if it had been made for her measurements specifically. The coincidence was too precise to be accidental, and she added it to the growing list of mysteries surrounding Lady Linnea's supposed anticipation of her arrival. "Lady Margot takes breakfast at 8 o'clock precisely," Daphne informed her, while arranging her hair into a simple but elegant style. "She requests that all household members attend, guests included. Lady Linnea usually joins around 8:30. She's not fond of early mornings, but she'll make an exception today, I'm sure." "And His Grace?" "The Duke breakfasts at 6 and spends the morning hours in his study." Daphne met her eyes in the mirror with an expression that suggested careful diplomacy. "He prefers to manage estate business without interruption. You might not see much of him during daylight hours, miss." So Alaric would be absent, leaving Carenza to face the formidable Lady Margot without ally or defender. Wonderful. She descended the grand staircase at precisely 8 o'clock, her palms damp inside her gloves, her pulse beating an irregular rhythm against her throat. A footman directed her to the breakfast room, a sunny chamber overlooking the eastern gardens, decorated in shades of yellow and cream that should have felt cheerful, but instead felt like an interrogation chamber dressed in pleasant disguise. And Lady Margot was already seated at the head of the table. She was perhaps 55 years old, though the severity of her features made accurate estimation difficult. Silver hair swept back from a face that shared certain structural similarities with Alaric, the strong jaw, the high cheekbones, but her eyes were pale blue rather than amber, and they contained none of his hidden warmth. She wore black, still in mourning for her brother, and the darkness of her attire seemed to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. "Miss Ashford," Lady Margot did not rise. "Sit." It was not an invitation. Carenza sat. "Tea or chocolate?" "Tea, please." "Thank you." No, Lady Margot. A servant poured with mechanical precision, while Lady Margot studied Carenza, the way a naturalist might study a peculiar specimen, with detached interest and the faint suggestion of distaste. "My nephew informs me that you are a friend of Linnea's from her Bath sojourn," Lady Margot said eventually. "He claims you met during her recovery and have maintained devoted correspondence ever since." "That is the account His Grace has provided, yes." "I notice you phrase that carefully." Lady Margot's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "You do not claim the account is accurate, merely that it is what my nephew has provided." Carenza's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I would not presume to contradict His Grace. But you would not confirm his story either." Lady Margot set down her teacup with a decisive click. "Let us dispense with pretense, Miss Ashford. I know exactly who you are. The daughter of Edmund Ashford, the merchant whose investments collapsed spectacularly 2 years ago. Sister to Silas Ashford, whose reputation for gambling and ill-advised ventures precedes him. You were being courted by Hadrian Voss until last evening, when he publicly declared you unworthy of his consideration." Each fact landed like a slap. Carenza felt her face heat, but refused to look away. "You are well informed, Lady Margot. I make it my business to be well informed about anyone who enters this household." Lady Margot leaned forward slightly. "But what I cannot determine from my inquiries is why my nephew chose you for this particular charade." The word hung in the air between them. Charade. So Lady Margot knew, or had guessed, that the story of friendship with Linnea was a fabrication. The question was whether she intended to expose the deception or simply understand it. "Perhaps," Carenza said slowly, "you should ask His Grace directly." "I have asked him. He provided his customary evasions." Lady Margot's expression sharpened. "My nephew has been avoiding the subject of marriage since his father's death. I have presented him with suitable candidates, women of breeding, fortune, and appropriate family connections, and he has rejected each without explanation. Lady Sabine Harcourt was my most recent effort, and I believed he was finally warming to the match. Then you appeared, and everything became considerably more complicated. I apologize for the complication. Do you?" Lady Margot studied her with unsettling intensity. "Or do you see opportunity in the chaos you've created?" The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Carenza had seen opportunity in Alaric's proposal, a chance to escape her circumstances, to secure her future, to rebuild something from the wreckage of the Whitmore ball. But that did not make her a fortune hunter or a schemer. "Lady Margot," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I have nothing to offer your nephew except honest companionship. I have no fortune to attract a title. I have no connections to advance his political interests. I am exactly what I appear to be, a woman from a reduced family. I'm publicly humiliated by a man who found me useful until a better option presented itself." "Then why are you here?" "Because your nephew asked me to be, because he offered terms I could not refuse, and because—" Carenza paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Because after being told I was worthless in front of 300 people, the chance to prove that assessment wrong held a certain appeal." Silence fell over the breakfast room. Lady Margot's expression remained difficult to interpret, but something recalibrated in the quality of her attention. A reassessment, perhaps, or the beginning of grudging respect. "You have spine," Lady Margot said finally. "I did not expect that." "I've had 2 years to develop it. Yes, I imagine reduced circumstances would cultivate a certain resilience." Lady Margot reached for her tea again, on her movements deliberate. "Very well, Miss Ashford. I will tell you what I told your predecessor in my nephew's schemes, the woman he hired to distract from Lady Genevieve Thornwood's pursuit last season." Carenza blinked. "There was someone before me?" "There have been several someones, though none lasted more than a few weeks. My nephew is creative in his evasions." Lady Margot's tone was dry. "What I told them, and what I tell you now, is this. I do not care about your background, your fortune, or your family's unfortunate circumstances. I care about Alaric's well-being and Linnea's happiness. Those are the only considerations that matter to me." "Alaric?" The name emerged before Carenza could stop it. "His father called him by his middle name, Sebastian. Everyone else uses Alaric." A shadow crossed Lady Margot's features. "Well, my brother died 8 months ago, and his son has not grieved properly. He buries himself in estate management and parliamentary duties and clever schemes to avoid marriage. He performs his responsibilities with mechanical precision, but feels nothing. He is surviving, Miss Ashford, but he is not living." The words echoed something Carenza had sensed in Alaric the previous evening. The controlled distance, the calculated responses, the moments when emotion flickered beneath the surface only to be ruthlessly suppressed. And you believe forcing him into marriage would help? She asked quietly. I believe he needs connection, purpose beyond duty, someone who sees past the title to the man beneath. Lady Margot's pale eyes held hers. Lady Sabine Harcourt would have been a competent duchess, but a terrible companion. She sees only the prestige, the position, the power. She would never challenge him, never push past his defenses, never demand that he actually feel anything. And you think I would? I think you already have. Lady Margot rose, signaling the end of the interview. Last night, for the first time in 8 months, my nephew made a spontaneous decision. He intervened in your humiliation without plan or preparation. He brought you into this house on impulse rather than strategy. Whatever else you are, Miss Ashford, you are interesting. And interesting is more than any of my carefully selected candidates have managed to be. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. One warning. If you hurt him, if you use his grief or his vulnerability for your own advancement, I will ensure you regret it. My brother built this family's influence over 50 years, and I will protect his legacy with every weapon at my disposal. The threat was delivered with the same calm precision as everything else Lady Margot said. Carenza did not doubt its sincerity. I understand, Lady Margot. Good. The older woman's expression softened fractionally. Now finish your breakfast. Linnea will be down shortly, and she has been anticipating this meeting for some time, even if the circumstances are not quite what she imagined. Lady Margot departed, leaving Carenza alone with her cooling tea and 1,000 new questions. She had expected hostility. She had prepared for interrogation and disapproval, and the cold dismissal reserved for women who overstepped their station. What she had not expected was insight. Lady Margot understood her nephew's emotional withdrawal in ways that Alaric himself probably did not recognize. She saw the grief beneath the control, the avoidance beneath the duty, the desperate need for connection beneath the elaborate schemes to avoid entanglement. And she had compared Carenza favorably to the carefully selected candidates, not because of breeding or fortune, but because Carenza was interesting, because she had already provoked a spontaneous reaction from a man who lived his life according to meticulous calculation. The breakfast room door burst open, and a young woman exploded through it, like a force of nature given human form. You're here. You're actually here. Linnea Vane crossed the room in 3 strides and seized Carenza's hands before she could rise from her chair. I've been waiting weeks for this. Why, and now you're finally here, and everything is going to be wonderful. Carenza stared at the girl who was supposedly her dearest friend, dark-haired like her brother, but with warm brown eyes that sparkled with uncontained enthusiasm. She was thin, perhaps too thin, with the pale complexion of someone recovering from serious illness, but her energy seemed endless, radiating outward like heat from a flame. Lady Linnea, Carenza managed. Linnea. Just Linnea. We're past formalities, aren't we? The girl released her hands only to pull up a chair beside her, ignoring the proper seating arrangement entirely. Now, tell me everything. The ball, the horrible Hadrian person, my brother's dramatic rescue. I want every detail. Whatever Carenza had expected from this meeting, it was not this immediate, overwhelming acceptance. Linnea behaved as if they truly were old friends reuniting after long separation, as if the fabricated story of Bath was simply understood rather than requiring explanation or performance. Perhaps it was. Perhaps Linnea, like her aunt, had already pieced together the truth and chosen to embrace the fiction regardless. It's rather a long story, Carenza said cautiously. Perfect. Linnea grinned, and for a moment, the family resemblance to Alaric was striking, not in features, but in the intensity of focus, The sense that when a vein decided to pay attention to you, the rest of the world ceased to exist. I have nothing but time, and you have nowhere else to be. So start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. Against all odds, Carenza found herself smiling. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of transformation. Carenza had expected to feel like a visitor, a temporary guest tolerated until the season's end. Instead, she found herself absorbed into the household with surprising speed, as if Ashworth Hall had simply been waiting for her to arrive and complete some missing piece. Linnea was the primary architect of this integration. She attached herself to Carenza with the determination of someone who had been desperately lonely and finally found relief, dragging her new companion through every corner of the estate, introducing her to every servant, sharing every secret passage and hidden garden and favorite reading nook. "This is where I hid when Aunt Margot made me practice French verbs for 3 hours," Linnea confided, on showing Carenza a cramped space behind the library shelves. "And this is where Father kept his forbidden collection of scandalous novels. Don't tell Alaric, he doesn't know they exist. And this," she pushed open a door to reveal a sun-drenched conservatory filled with exotic plants, "is where Mother used to sit every morning before she died." The conservatory became their favorite retreat. They spent hours among the orange trees and orchids, Linnea curled on a wicker settee, while Carenza read aloud from whatever novel they were currently sharing. The air was warm and fragrant, heavy with humidity and the scent of blooming jasmine. And in those quiet moments, the pretense of the arrangement seemed to fade into something more genuine. Linnea never asked directly about the true nature of Carenza's presence, but sometimes, when they sat in comfortable silence, she would say things that suggested she understood more than she admitted. "Alaric has been different since you arrived," she observed one afternoon, her eyes closed against the afternoon sun. "More present, less like a ghost going through the motions." "I've barely seen him," Carenza replied, which was true. Alaric took his breakfast before anyone else rose and spent his days closeted in his study with estate managers and solicitors and an endless parade of business that apparently could not wait. They crossed paths at dinner, where he was polite but distant, and occasionally in the hallways, where he nodded with formal courtesy and continued on his way. "That's exactly what I mean." Linnea opened one eye. "Before you came, he was like a machine, perfectly efficient, perfectly controlled, perfectly empty. Now he's avoiding you, which means he's aware of you, which means you've gotten under his skin somehow. I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It absolutely is." Linnea sat up, her expression suddenly serious. "My brother has been sleepwalking through his life since Father died. Mother's death broke something in Father, but Father's death broke something in Alaric. Different kinds of broken, but broken nonetheless." "What do you mean?" "Father grieved openly. He missed Mother every day, and he let us see it. He talked about her constantly, kept her portrait in his study, and visited her grave every Sunday. His grief was present, visible, part of who he was." Linnea's voice softened. "Alaric doesn't grieve like that. He just stopped feeling anything at all. Like he decided the only way to survive was to turn everything off." Carenza thought about Lady Margot's words at their first meeting. He is surviving, but he is not living. 2 different women who loved Alaric Vane had arrived at the same conclusion, and neither knew how to pull him back from the precipice of his own emotional withdrawal. "I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it," Carenza said carefully. "This arrangement, whatever it actually is, ends when the season ends. I'm not here to fix anyone." "I'm not asking you to fix him." Linnea reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm just asking you not to let him push you away. Everyone else accepts the distance because they think a duke is supposed to be distant. But you're not everyone else. You have no reason to be impressed by his title. And you've already seen him at his most human, rescuing a damsel in the middle of a ballroom. Maybe you can remind him what that felt like. The conversation stayed with Carenza long after Linnea drifted off for her afternoon rest. She found herself watching for Alaric with new attention, cataloging the small details of his carefully constructed distance. The way he entered rooms already armored in polite formality. The way he answered questions with just enough information to satisfy without revealing anything personal. The way his eyes sometimes went distant in the middle of conversations, as if part of him had retreated somewhere no one could follow. He was avoiding her. Linnea was right about that. But she was also right that avoidance required awareness, and awareness suggested she had affected him somehow. The question was what to do about it. The modiste arrived 3 days after Carenza's arrival, a whirlwind of French vowels and measuring tapes named Madame Colbert. She clucked over Carenza's proportions with professional appreciation, ordered fabrics in colors that would illuminate her complexion, and promised a complete wardrobe within the fortnight. His grace was most specific, Madame Colbert confided, while pinning a muslin sample to Carenza's bodice. Quality without ostentation, he said. Elegance that whispers rather than shouts. He has exquisite taste for a man. Did he? Carenza kept her expression neutral, but something warm curled in her chest at the thought of Alaric providing specific guidance for her wardrobe. It seemed an unexpectedly intimate thing for a man maintaining careful distance to concern himself with. Why, most gentlemen simply say, spend whatever necessary, and wash their hands of the matter. Madame Colbert adjusted a seam with expert fingers. But His Grace wanted to ensure you would feel comfortable. Those were his words exactly. I want her to feel comfortable, not costumed. Comfortable, not costumed. As if he understood, somehow, that Carenza's greatest fear in this arrangement was losing herself beneath layers of borrowed finery and assumed identity. That evening, she encountered him unexpectedly in the library. She had come searching for a volume of poetry Linnea had mentioned, expecting the room to be empty at this hour. Instead, she found Alaric standing by the window, silhouetted against the dying light of sunset, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Miss Ashford. He turned at her entrance, his expression shifting from unguarded contemplation to polite neutrality so quickly she almost missed the transition. Forgive me. I didn't realize anyone else was about. I was looking for a book. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain whether to enter or retreat. I can come back later if... No, please. He gestured toward the shelves. The library is yours to use whenever you wish. That was part of the arrangement. She moved toward the poetry section, acutely aware of his presence at the periphery of her vision. The library was large enough that they could have ignored each other easily, but somehow the space felt intimate, charged with unspoken tension. Linnea mentioned your father's collection was exceptional, she said, filling the silence. So I haven't had time to explore it properly yet. Father spent 40 years acquiring rare volumes. Alaric's voice was carefully neutral. His particular passion was romantic poetry, which my aunt found deeply inappropriate for a duke. She tried to convince him to collect military histories instead. He ignored her completely. Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was. A pause. The collection is yours to browse however you like. Father believed books were meant to be read, not simply displayed. Carenza found the volume she was seeking and pulled it from the shelf, but she did not immediately leave. Instead, she turned to face Alaric properly, taking in the shadows beneath his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. You've been avoiding me, she said quietly. Surprise registered in his expression. I've been busy. You've been hiding. She kept her voice gentle rather than accusatory. Linnea says you've been different since I arrived. Lady Margot says I provoked a spontaneous reaction you weren't expecting. Neither of them seems certain whether that's good or bad, and neither, I suspect, do you. The silence stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. "You're rather direct for a woman in a precarious position," Alaric said finally. "I've been told I'm not worth choosing. After that, what do I have to lose by being honest?" She met his eyes without flinching. "If this arrangement is going to work, if we're going to convince society that you're genuinely interested in a woman like me, you cannot continue treating me like a stranger you hired. People will notice the distance. They'll talk. People will talk regardless. Then give them something better to talk about." Carenza stepped closer, close enough to see the amber flecks in his irises and the faint lines of sleeplessness around his eyes. "Talk to me at dinner instead of addressing your plate. Acknowledge me when we pass in hallways instead of nodding like I'm a servant. Pretend, at least, that you find my company tolerable." His jaw tightened. "I find your company considerably more than tolerable, Miss Ashford. That is precisely the problem." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. "I don't understand," she breathed. "I know." He set down his glass with careful precision. And I'm not certain I can explain it to you without making things considerably more complicated." "More complicated than a fake courtship arranged over the wreckage of my public humiliation?" A ghost of a smile crossed his features, the first genuine expression she had seen from him since the night of the ball. "Fair point." He crossed to one of the shelves and retrieved a small leather-bound volume, offering it to her with an almost hesitant gesture. "This was my mother's favorite. She used to read it in the conservatory every morning, according to Linnea. I thought, perhaps you might enjoy it." Carenza took the book, her fingers brushing his in the transfer. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her, electric and unsettling. "Why?" she asked. "Why give me this?" "Because you asked me to treat you as more than a stranger." His gaze held hers, and she saw something there she hadn't noticed before: vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath layers of control. "This is me trying." She looked down at the book. The gilt letters on the cover had faded with age, but she could make out the title: "Sonnets for the Unconventional Heart." "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold to look back at her. "For what it's worth, Miss Ashford, Hadrian Voss was wrong. Whatever worth you possess has nothing to do with fortune or family connections. And anyone who fails to recognize that is a fool who deserves to be pitied, not mourned." He was gone before she could formulate a response, for disappearing into the shadowed hallway, like a man fleeing from something he couldn't name. Carenza stood alone in the library, clutching his mother's book to her chest, and wondered how something that had begun as pure performance was already starting to feel dangerously real. The Pemberton ball arrived like a storm on the horizon, anticipated, unavoidable, and carrying the potential for destruction. 3 weeks had passed since Carenza's arrival at Ashworth Hall. 3 weeks of transformation, of learning to walk and speak and exist as someone who belonged in gilded ballrooms and aristocratic drawing rooms. 3 weeks of deepening friendship with Linnea, careful navigation of Lady Margot's watchful presence, and increasingly complicated feelings about a certain duke who had stopped avoiding her but had not yet begun explaining himself. Alaric had kept his word. He spoke to her at dinner now, asking about her day, her reading, and her impressions of the household. He acknowledged her in hallways with something warmer than formal nods. He even on occasion joined her and Linnea in the conservatory, sitting quietly while they read aloud, his tawny gaze distant, but his presence oddly comforting. But he had not touched her again, had not offered another gift, had not elaborated on his cryptic admission that he found her company considerably more than tolerable. The Pemberton ball would be their first public appearance since the Whitmore disaster, Society had been speculating wildly for 3 weeks, and tonight they would finally have something concrete to observe. "You look magnificent," Linnea declared, circling Carenza with critical appreciation. Madame Colbert has outdone herself. That shade of midnight blue makes your eyes look like storm clouds." "Is that a compliment?" "Absolutely. Storm clouds are dramatic and powerful and impossible to ignore." Linnea adjusted a curl that had escaped Carenza's elaborate hairstyle. "Hadrian Voss will choke on his champagne when he sees you." The mention of Hadrian sent a cold spike through Carenza's stomach. She had known, intellectually, that she would encounter him eventually. London society was not large enough to avoid anyone indefinitely, but knowing and preparing were different things entirely. Will he be there? Almost certainly. The Pembertons invite everyone, and Hadrian never misses an opportunity to display himself. Linnea's expression hardened. "But this time, you won't be alone. You'll have Alaric, and me, and even Aunt Margot if necessary. If he so much as looks at you wrong, we'll destroy him." The fierce loyalty in Linnea's voice made Carenza's throat constrict. 3 weeks ago, she had been friendless and humiliated. Now she had allies who spoke of destruction on her behalf as casually as discussing the weather. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." "Don't thank me yet," Linnea grinned. "The evening hasn't even started. Save your gratitude for after we've conquered London society and left Hadrian Voss weeping into his cravat." The carriage ride to Pemberton House was tense with anticipation. Lady Margot had elected to remain home, claiming a headache, but more likely positioning herself to receive detailed reports from the servants' network that seemed to know everything happening in London at any given moment. And this left Carenza alone with Alaric and Linnea in the intimate confines of the Ashworth carriage. Alaric sat across from her, resplendent in formal evening wear that made him look even more intimidatingly aristocratic than usual. His eyes moved over her gown with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Appreciation, perhaps, or something more complicated. "You're nervous," he observed. "I'm terrified," she corrected. "The last ball I attended ended with public humiliation and a dramatic escape in your carriage. Forgive me if I'm not approaching this evening with unbridled enthusiasm. The circumstances are different now." "Are they?" "I'm still the same woman Hadrian Voss found unworthy. The same woman society dismissed as a fortune hunter reaching above her station. A new gown doesn't change the fundamental mathematics." Alaric leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Listen to me carefully, Miss Ashford. When we enter that ballroom tonight, you will be on my arm. You will be presented as my guest, my interest, my potential future. Whatever mathematics society was calculating 3 weeks ago, the equation has changed. You are no longer a desperate woman grasping at straws. You are a woman, a duke found worthy of pursuit. Act accordingly." The command in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear. Something else entirely. Something that made her skin flush with warmth despite the cool evening air. "And if they don't believe the performance, then we make them believe." He sat back, his expression softening slightly. "You've survived worse than gossip, Miss Ashford. Now you survived watching your family lose everything. You survived Hadrian Voss's cruelty in front of 300 witnesses. A ballroom full of curious aristocrats should be a minor challenge by comparison." He was right. She knew he was right. But knowing and feeling were different things, and her feelings were currently a chaotic mess of anxiety and anticipation, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Pemberton House blazed with light as their carriage joined the queue of arriving guests. Through the windows, Carenza could see the cream of London society ascending the entrance stairs, all glittering jewels and expensive fabrics and the carefully cultivated air of people who had never doubted their place in the world. "Remember," Linnea whispered, squeezing her hand. You belong here. Whatever anyone says, or whatever anyone thinks, you belong here because we want you here. The carriage door opened. Alaric descended first, then turned to offer Carenza his hand. She took it. The moment they entered the ballroom, the whispers began. Carenza felt the wave of attention roll through the crowd. Heads turning, fans rising, conversations pausing mid-sentence as hundreds of eyes fixed on the Duke of Ashworth and the mysterious woman on his arm. She kept her chin high and her expression serene, channeling every lesson her mother had ever taught about deportment and grace under pressure. Steady, Alaric murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. You're doing perfectly. They moved through the crowd with deliberate slowness, allowing society ample opportunity to observe and assess. And Alaric introduced her to lords and ladies, whose names she immediately forgot, all of whom regarded her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. She smiled and curtsied and made appropriate responses, the performance coming easier than she had expected. And then she saw him. Hadrian Voss stood near the refreshment tables, a glass of champagne in one hand, and Lady Sabine Harcourt on his arm. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome, polished, and utterly confident in his place in the world. When their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, his expression flickered with something that might have been surprise before settling into amused condescension. Carenza's stomach lurched. Every instinct screamed at her to look away, to retreat, to escape before he could deliver another devastating blow. Instead, she met his gaze directly and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a desperate smile. A smile of absolute serenity, as if his presence meant nothing to her, as if his words 3 weeks ago had been water rolling off stone. Hadrian's expression faltered. Beside her, Alaric's hand pressed more firmly against her back. Approval, she realized. Encouragement. He had seen the exchange and recognized what it cost her. The first dance will begin shortly, he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Will you honor me? You don't have to. I'm not asking out of obligation. His eyes, the color of aged honey, held hers with unexpected intensity. I'm asking because I want to, because the thought of watching you dance with anyone else tonight is unexpectedly intolerable. The admission made her breath catch. Before she could formulate a response, the orchestra began the opening strains of a waltz, and Alaric was leading her onto the dance floor. They had practiced, of course. Linnea had insisted, hiring a dancing master to ensure Carenza could match her brother's skill. But practice had not prepared her for this. The reality of his hand at her waist, his eyes locked on hers, the world falling away until nothing existed except the music and the movement and the man holding her as if she were precious. Everyone is watching, she whispered. Let them watch. He turned her smoothly, guiding them through the other couples with effortless grace. Let them see exactly what they're meant to see. A man captivated by a woman who deserves to be captivated by. You're rather good at this performance. Who says it's a performance? The question hung between them, weighted with implications she was afraid to examine. They danced in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, charged with something that felt less like pretense and more like possibility. When the waltz concluded, applause scattered through the ballroom. Carenza curtsied while Alaric bowed, and she was acutely aware that they had just made a statement that would be discussed in every drawing room in London by morning. They had barely stepped off the dance floor when Lady Sabine Harcourt materialized before them, Hadrian Voss at her side. Your Grace, Lady Sabine said, her smile sharp as glass. What a delightful surprise to see you dancing this evening. I had quite given up hope you might participate in social activities again. Lady Sabine, Alaric's tone was ice. "See, I see you found suitable companionship." The barb landed precisely where intended. Lady Sabine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly. "Mr. Voss has been most attentive." She turned her gaze to Carenza, assessing and dismissive. "And Miss Ashford, how lovely to see you again. I trust you've recovered from your unfortunate evening at the Whitmore ball." "Completely recovered, thank you." Carenza kept her voice pleasant. One can hardly dwell on minor disappointments when presented with superior alternatives. Hadrian's expression darkened. "Superior alternatives? Is that what you call it? Trading one man's interest for another's?" "I call it recognizing worth when it presents itself." Carenza met his eyes without flinching. "Something you seem incapable of doing." The silence that followed was absolute. Around them, nearby guests had stopped even pretending not to listen, openly observing the confrontation with hungry anticipation. "You forget yourself, Miss Ashford." Hadrian's voice was low, dangerous. "Whatever fantasy you've constructed about your position here, it remains fantasy. A duke doesn't genuinely pursue women of your station. He merely— choose your next words very carefully, Voss." Alaric's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Because whatever you're about to say will determine how the rest of this evening proceeds for you." Hadrian's face flushed. He was not accustomed to being challenged, particularly not in public, particularly not by men whose social position far exceeded his own. "Forgive me, Your Grace," he said, the words clearly costing him. "I spoke out of turn." "Yes, you did." Alaric's hand found Carenza's, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of unmistakable intimacy. "My interest in Miss Ashford is neither your concern nor your business. I suggest you remember that." He led Carenza away without waiting for a response, leaving Hadrian Voss standing in the middle of the ballroom, publicly rebuked for the second time in 3 weeks. But Carenza barely noticed. Her entire awareness had narrowed to the warmth of Alaric's hand in hers, the protective fury in his voice, the way he had called her his interest without hesitation or qualification. Something had shifted between them, something dangerous and exhilarating and impossible to ignore, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The gardens of Pemberton House offered refuge from the suffocating weight of social observation. Carenza stood among sculpted hedges and sleeping roses, breathing air that didn't taste of gossip and speculation. Behind her, the ballroom glowed with golden light and the sound of music and laughter. But out here, the world was silver and shadow and blessed silence. Alaric had released her hand the moment they escaped through the terrace doors, as if the contact had burned him. He stood several feet away now, his profile sharp against the moonlit gardens, his expression troubled in ways she couldn't fully read. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Confront him like that. Defend me so publicly." "Yes, I did." "Why?" He turned to face her, and the moonlight caught his features in a way that made her breath catch. The strong jaw, the amber eyes now dark with unnamed emotion, the tension in his shoulders that suggested barely leashed control. "Because he had no right to speak to you that way. Because watching him dismiss you as worthless made me want to destroy him. Because—" He broke off, shaking his head. "Because this stopped being a performance somewhere along the way, and I'm not entirely certain when that happened." The admission hung between them, fragile and electric. "Alaric," she breathed, and his name felt different in her mouth now. Intimate, significant, weighted with meaning that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. "Don't." He held up a hand, his voice rough. "Don't say my name like that unless you mean it, unless you understand what you're inviting." "What am I inviting?" "Complication. Danger. The possibility that this arrangement becomes something neither of us planned for." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, despite the cool evening air. "I hired you to play a role, Miss Ashford. I did not hire you to make me feel things I thought I'd successfully buried." "What things?" "Want." The word came out harsh, almost angry. "Hope. The terrifying suspicion that perhaps I'm not as dead inside as I believed." Carence's pulse raced in her throat. This was not the controlled, distant Duke she had met at the Whitmore ball. This was someone raw and vulnerable and frighteningly honest. "Your sister thinks you stopped feeling anything after your father died," she said carefully. "She thinks you turned everything off to survive. Linnea is perceptive. Lady Margot thinks you're avoiding marriage because you're afraid of loss. That watching your father grieve your mother for 20 years convinced you that love is simply a different kind of pain. My aunt is also perceptive." His jaw tightened. "They're both correct. Loving someone means giving them the power to destroy you. I watched my father live as half a person after my mother died, present in body, absent in spirit. He performed his duties admirably, but he was never truly happy again, never truly whole. And you decided that was unacceptable. I decided it was unnecessary." His eyes held hers, intense and searching. Why risk devastation when contentment is available without cost? Why open yourself to loss when solitude is perfectly survivable? Because survivable isn't the same as living. Carenza reached out, her fingers brushing his jaw in a gesture that felt bold and reckless and absolutely necessary. Because turning everything off doesn't protect you from pain. It just ensures you feel nothing at all. Not the bad things, but not the good things either. He caught her wrist, his grip gentle despite the tension thrumming through him. "You speak as if you understand." "I do understand. After Hadrian, after everything that happened, my first instinct was to protect myself, to decide that hope was dangerous and expectation was foolish, and the safest path forward was wanting nothing at all." She met his eyes without flinching. "But safe is just another word for empty, and I'm tired of being empty." The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. "If I kiss you right now," Alaric said slowly, "everything changes. There's no going back to performance and arrangement and careful distance. Do you understand that?" "Yes." "And you want this anyway?" "I want you to stop protecting yourself from things that might actually make you happy." She stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them. "I want you to take a risk, even if it terrifies you. I want—" He kissed her before she could finish. It was nothing like the chaste social kisses she had observed at balls and parties, polite, performative, and meaningless. This was hunger and desperation, and the release of weeks of suppressed tension, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that stole her breath and her balance and every coherent thought in her head. Her hands found his shoulders, his lapels, and the solid warmth of his chest beneath layers of fine fabric. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer until no space remained between them, until she could feel his heartbeat hammering against her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, the world had tilted on its foundations. "This is madness," he said, his forehead pressed against hers. "You know that." "Complete madness," she agreed. "My aunt will be furious. Society will be scandalized. Lady Sabine will probably attempt to have you poisoned." All excellent points. And yet I find myself completely incapable of caring about any of them. He pulled back slightly, his amber eyes searching her face with an expression that made her chest ache. "What have you done to me, Carenza Ashford?" It was the first time he had used her given name. The intimacy of it sent warmth flooding through her veins. I believe I've reminded you that you're still alive," she whispered. And that being alive means feeling things, even when those things are frightening. Particularly when those things are frightening. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less intense. We should return to the ballroom before we create an actual scandal, rather than merely a rumored one. Should we? Probably. He didn't move to release her. In a moment. They stood together in the moonlit garden, wrapped in each other's arms, while the ball continued its glittering dance without them. Somewhere inside, society was speculating about their extended absence. Somewhere inside, Hadrian Voss was nursing his wounded pride, and Lady Sabine was plotting her next move. None of it mattered. What mattered was this moment, this man, and this impossible thing that had grown between them in the space of 3 weeks. What mattered was the warmth of his embrace, and the tenderness in his eyes, and the realization that perhaps, against all odds, she had found something worth risking everything for. My father wrote in his journal once that love is the only form of madness worth pursuing, Alaric said quietly. I found the passage after he died. I didn't understand it then. I think perhaps I'm beginning to understand it now. What else did he write? That my mother was worth every moment of grief he experienced after losing her. That he would choose her again, knowing exactly how it would end, because the joy of loving her outweighed the pain of losing her. His voice roughened. I thought he was a fool for feeling that way, and now I'm beginning to suspect he was simply braver than I gave him credit for. Carenza reached up, cupping his face in her hands. You're brave too, even if you don't believe it yet. I'm terrified. Being terrified and being brave aren't mutually exclusive. She smiled. In fact, I think being terrified is a prerequisite. He laughed then, a real laugh, surprised out of him, transforming his features into something younger and lighter and achingly beautiful. Come, he said, taking her hand. Let's return before Linnea sends a search party. She's probably already invented 12 different theories about what we're doing out here. Will any of them be accurate? Probably several. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Though I suspect her imagination pales in comparison to reality. They walked back toward the ballroom together, hands intertwined, no longer pretending. And Carenza Ashford, the woman Hadrian Voss had declared worthless 3 weeks ago, felt like the richest person in the world. The dream shattered 3 days later. Carenza woke to the sound of raised voices echoing through Ashworth Hall's normally serene corridors. She threw on a dressing gown and hurried toward the commotion, her pulse spiking with undefined dread. She found them in the morning room, Alaric, Lady Margot, and a woman she didn't recognize. A woman with silver blonde hair and ice blue eyes, and a presence that commanded attention simply by existing. Ah, the stranger said, turning as Carenza appeared in the doorway. This must be the creature causing all the fuss. Vivian, Alaric's voice was steel. I asked you to wait. Vivian. The name registered dimly through Carenza's shock. This was someone significant. Someone whose arrival had thrown the household into chaos. Lady Margot caught Carenza's confusion and supplied the explanation in terse tones. The late Duke's second wife, Alaric and Linnea's stepmother. She married their father 5 years ago and has been abroad since his death. Collecting myself, the dowager corrected smoothly. Grief is so taxing, and the continent offers such superior facilities for recovery. Her ice-blue eyes swept over Carenza with dismissive assessment. I returned when I heard rumors that my stepson had attached himself to an unsuitable prospect. Imagine my concern. Your concern is unnecessary, Alaric said flatly. Miss Ashford is my guest, and my choices are not subject to your approval. No? Then why do I receive letters from Lady Sabine Harcourt's mother, demanding to know if the arrangement I proposed to your father remains valid? The dowager produced a folded paper from her reticule. You remember the arrangement, don't you, Alaric? The one I convinced your father to consider before his unfortunate demise? The marriage contract between yourself and Lady Sabine? The world tilted beneath Carence's feet. Marriage contract. Existing arrangement. Lady Sabine. That contract was never finalized, Alaric said, but something in his voice wavered. The first crack in his armor Carence had ever witnessed. The preliminary agreements were signed. The dowry was specified. The families reached understanding. The dowager smiled, cold and triumphant. Your father may have died before the final documents were executed, but the intention was clear. Lady Sabine was to be your duchess. This, she gestured dismissively toward Carence. This distraction changes nothing. She's not a distraction. No? Then what is she? The dowager stepped closer to Carence, examining her like livestock at auction. A merchant's daughter, whose family lost everything through incompetent investment. A woman publicly discarded by Hadrian Voss, hardly a recommendation for quality. A charity case you've taken up to avoid your responsibilities. Each word landed like a blow. Carence felt herself shrinking, all the confidence she had built over the past weeks crumbling beneath the dowager's ruthless assessment. That's enough! Lady Margot stepped forward, her expression furious. Whatever your claims, Vivian, you have no authority in this household. The title passed to Alaric. The decisions are his to make. The decisions may be his, but the consequences belong to all of us. The dowager turned back to Alaric, her voice softening to something almost maternal. My dear boy, I understand the appeal. She's pretty enough, and clearly quite clever to have positioned herself so effectively. But you must see that this path leads nowhere. Marry her, and you invite scandal. Marry her, and you weaken alliances your father spent decades building. Marry her, and you prove to everyone that the Ashworth title is not worth what it once was. I don't care about— You should care! The dowager's voice sharpened. You should care because your father would have cared, because everything he built depended on strategic marriages and calculated alliances, not romantic foolishness with unsuitable women. She paused, letting the words sink in. Honor his memory, Alaric. Complete the arrangement I worked so hard to secure for this family. Marry Lady Sabine as intended. The silence that followed was suffocating. Carence watched Alaric's face, searching for some sign that he would reject the dowager's demands, that the connection they had built meant more than contractual obligations and family expectations. But his expression had closed down. The warmth she had glimpsed in the garden, the vulnerability he had shown when he kissed her, all of it had retreated behind walls of duty and propriety and the crushing weight of legacy. Alaric, she said softly, or tell me this isn't true. Tell me there was no arrangement. He couldn't meet her eyes. There were discussions, he said finally, before my father died. Vivienne proposed the match, and my father considered it. Nothing was finalized, but discussions occurred. And you didn't think to mention this when you proposed our arrangement? When you— She broke off, the memory of the garden too painful to speak aloud. I believed it was irrelevant. The contract was incomplete. I had no intention of honoring it. But you knew it existed. You knew Lady Sabine believed she had a claim on you. You let me believe I was the only complication in your path to marriage, when in reality, I was competing with a formal arrangement your stepmother orchestrated. Carence, don't. She held up a hand, her voice cracking. Don't say my name like it matters. Don't pretend this, whatever this was real. It was real, Was it? She gestured at the dowager, at the letter still clutched in those manicured fingers. Because from where I stand, it looks like I was exactly what Hadrian Voss said I was, a diversion, a pleasant way to pass the time until someone suitable demanded their due. That's not. Your stepmother is right. Carenza felt something breaking inside her chest, but she forced the words out anyway. I don't belong here. I never did. I was a desperate woman grasping at straws, and you were a grieving man avoiding responsibility. Whatever we thought we felt in that garden, it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Because real things don't crumble the moment someone produces a piece of paper. The dowager watched this exchange with barely concealed satisfaction. Lady Margot looked stricken. And Alaric stood frozen, his face ashen, unable to produce the words that might have stopped her. I'll leave today, Carenza continued, her voice steadier than she felt. Thank Linnea for her friendship. Tell her, she paused, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't stay. Carenza, please. But she was already walking away, back through the corridors of Ashworth Hall, past the portraits of generations who had never questioned their place in the world, toward the ivory suite, where her borrowed dresses hung like ghosts of the woman she had briefly pretended to be. She packed with mechanical efficiency, when taking only what she had arrived with, the silver gown from the Whitmore ball, the modest belongings she'd brought from home, and the book of sonnets Alaric had given her that first week. She should leave the book. It was his mother's, precious and irreplaceable. Keeping it felt like theft. But when she tried to place it on the dressing table, her hands refused to cooperate. Some things, once given, could not be returned. Some memories, once created, could not be erased. She tucked the book into her bag and walked out of Ashworth Hall without looking back. The carriage ride home felt endless. She stared through the window at passing countryside that blurred through tears she no longer tried to suppress. Everything she had built over the past 3 weeks, the confidence, the hope, the impossible dream that perhaps she had found where she belonged, all of it lay in ruins behind her. Hadrian Voss had been right. She wasn't worth choosing. She never had been. 3 days passed in a fog of misery. Carenza moved through her family's modest home like a ghost, performing necessary tasks without awareness, speaking when spoken to but offering nothing more. Her mother watched with worried eyes, but asked no questions. Her father retreated further into his silence. Only Silas pressed for explanations, and she gave him none. What was there to explain? She had reached for something beyond her grasp and been reminded, brutally, of her place in the world. The same lesson she should have learned from Hadrian Voss, but had apparently needed to learn twice. On the 4th morning, a carriage arrived. While Carenza watched from her bedroom window as Linnea Vane descended from the Ashworth vehicle, her expression determined despite the obvious anxiety in her movements. She looked thinner than she had 3 days ago, pale and fragile, in ways that made her heart clench with concern. She should refuse to see her. Should send word that she was indisposed, that visitors were not welcome, that whatever connection had existed between them was now severed by circumstances beyond their control. Instead, she found herself walking down the stairs to the modest parlor where Linnea waited. You look terrible, Linnea said without preamble. Thank you. I mean it. When was the last time you slept properly? Or ate? You look like you're preparing for your own funeral. Linnea crossed the room and seized Carenza's hands. This is ridiculous. You have to come back. I can't. Why? Because Vivian appeared with her theatrics, and her contracts, and her manipulations? Linnea's grip tightened. She's lying, Carenza. Or at least, she's twisting the truth beyond recognition. The contract exists. A preliminary discussion exists. One Vivian convinced my father to consider, briefly, before he decided that Lady Sabine was exactly the wrong sort of woman for his son. Linnea's eyes blazed. My father never would have forced that match. He believed in choosing for oneself. He chose my mother against his family's wishes, and he never regretted it. Whatever Vivian claims, she's manufacturing pressure to suit her own purposes. What purposes? She wants control. She always has. Linnea released her hands and began pacing, her movements agitated. She married my father for position and wealth, not love. She spent 5 years trying to manipulate him into giving her more authority, more influence, more control over family decisions. When he died, she expected to continue as she had been. Instead, everything passed to Alaric, who refuses to be managed. She seems to be managing him quite effectively. She surprised him, caught him off guard with accusations and contracts, and the weight of our father's memory. Linnea stopped pacing, turning to face Carenza directly. But he's not accepting it. He's been locked in his study for 3 days, refusing meals, refusing visitors, refusing everything except endless research into the legal standing of preliminary marriage agreements. A flame reignited in Carenza's chest, hope trying to resurface despite her attempts to smother it. It doesn't matter, she said, forcing the words out. Even if the contract isn't binding, the reality remains. I'm not suitable. I never was. Your stepmother simply voiced what everyone already thinks. Everyone except the people who actually matter. Linnea stepped closer. Aunt Margot hasn't stopped cursing Vivian since you left. The servants have been walking around like someone died. Even Mrs. Blackwood, who never displays emotion about anything, told me she misses you. And Alaric? Alaric is destroying himself. Linnea's voice cracked. He's doing exactly what he did when Father died, retreating, shutting down, burying himself in work instead of feeling anything. Except this time, it's worse. Because this time, he knows what he's losing. He let me walk away. He was shocked, ambushed. Vivian planned her attack perfectly, arriving when he least expected it, deploying information calculated to cause maximum damage. Linnea took her hands again. But that doesn't mean he wanted you to leave. It doesn't mean he chose duty over you. He didn't choose me either. Then make him choose. Linnea's eyes were fierce, determined. Go back. Confront him. Force him to say what he actually feels instead of hiding behind obligation and propriety and the ghost of our father's expectations. You're the bravest person I know, Carenza. You survived public humiliation and came out stronger. You navigated Aunt Margot's interrogation without flinching. You made my brother laugh for the first time in 8 months. Her voice softened. Don't let Vivian win, please. Carenza wanted to refuse. Every rational part of her brain screamed that returning to Ashworth Hall would only lead to more pain, more rejection, more proof that she was not worth choosing. But then she remembered Alaric's voice in the garden. Being terrified and being brave aren't mutually exclusive. She remembered her own words. Safe is just another word for empty. She remembered the kiss, the warmth, the impossible feeling that perhaps, against all odds, she had found where she belonged. One conversation, she heard herself say. That's all. If he doesn't, if he can't, he can. Linnea's smile was radiant with relief. He just needs you to show him how. The journey back to Ashworth Hall felt different than before. Not the confusion of the first night, or the despair of the departure, but something else. Determination, perhaps, or the reckless courage of someone with nothing left to lose. When the carriage rolled to a stop before the grand entrance, Carenza stepped out before the footman could assist her. Mrs. Blackwood met her in the entrance hall, her severe face softening into something that might have been a smile. "Miss Ashford, welcome back." "Where is he?" "The library. He hasn't left in 3 days except to sleep, and I'm not certain he's doing much of that." Carenza nodded and walked toward the library with purpose, her pulse racing in her veins. The door was closed. She didn't knock. Alaric sat at his father's desk, surrounded by papers and books and the detritus of obsessive research. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his usual immaculate appearance abandoned in favor of rumpled shirt sleeves and what appeared to be the same trousers he'd worn 3 days ago. He looked up when she entered, and the expression that crossed his face was so raw, so vulnerable, that her lungs forgot their purpose. "Carenza, you look terrible," she said, echoing Linnea's greeting. "I feel terrible." He stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might frighten her away. "You came back." "I came back to hear you say it, out loud, not what duty demands or what contracts suggest or what your stepmother wants. I want to hear what you want, Alaric, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do about it." The silence filled the space between them, heavy with possibility. And then he spoke. "I want you." The words emerged, rough and raw, torn from somewhere deep in Alaric's chest. "I want you," he repeated, crossing the distance between them until they stood close enough to share warmth. "I want your courage and your honesty, and the way you make me feel like I'm actually alive instead of merely existing. I want to wake up knowing I'll see you at breakfast and fall asleep knowing you're somewhere under this roof. I want arguments and compromises, and the terrifying vulnerability of choosing someone who could destroy me." His hands found her face, cupping it gently as his amber eyes searched hers. "I want what my father had with my mother, even knowing how it ended. I want the joy more than I fear the pain. I want—" his voice cracked. "I want you to know that you are worth choosing. You were always worth choosing. The only fool in this equation was me, for taking 3 days to find the courage to tell you." Carenza's eyes filled with tears. "The contract is worthless. I spent 3 days confirming what I already suspected. Preliminary discussions without executed documents have no legal standing. Vivian was bluffing, using my grief and my father's memory to manipulate me into compliance." His jaw tightened. "She's been removed from Ashworth Hall, permanently. And Lady Sabine has been informed, clearly and finally, that no arrangement exists or will exist between our families." He took a shaky breath. "I should have told you about the discussions from the beginning. I should have been honest instead of assuming they were irrelevant. I let my avoidance of the topic create an ambush that hurt you, and for that, I am deeply sorry. You let me walk away. I was frozen, shocked. Everything Vivian said played on every fear I'd been suppressing. That I wasn't honoring my father's wishes, that I was failing my duty, that wanting something for myself was selfish and wrong." He pressed his forehead against hers. "But watching you leave was worse than any of those fears. Losing you was worse than anything I'd been trying to protect myself from." "Alaric, let me finish." His hands trembled slightly against her face. "I am not a man who expresses himself easily. I've spent years building walls, avoiding vulnerability, convincing myself that duty and obligation were sufficient reasons for living. Meeting you demolished every defense I'd constructed, and I've been terrified ever since. Terrified of what? Of caring, of hoping, of discovering that perhaps my father was right, and love, real love, is worth the risk of loss." He pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes with absolute sincerity. "I love you, Carenza Ashford, not because of arrangement or obligation or social advantage. I love you because you made me brave enough to feel something again. And if you'll allow me, I would like to spend the rest of my life proving that you are worth so much more than you've been led to believe." The tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks as she tried to find words adequate to the moment. "I love you too," she managed, despite every rational argument against it, despite the impossibility of our circumstances, despite the certainty that I don't deserve. Don't. He kissed her then, soft and tender and full of promise. "Don't ever say you don't deserve this. You deserve everything, and I intend to give it to you if you'll let me." The library door burst open, and Linnea appeared, followed by Lady Margot and what appeared to be half the household staff. "Finally!" Linnea exclaimed. "I thought you two would never sort yourselves out." "Linnea," Alaric said, not releasing Carenza from his embrace, "how long have you been listening at the door?" "Long enough to know that I was right about everything." She grinned. "Aunt Margot, you owe me £10. I told you he'd declare himself within the hour." Lady Margot huffed. "I didn't doubt he would declare himself. I merely questioned the timeline." She approached Carenza, her expression softening in ways that seemed almost uncomfortable for her face to produce. "Welcome back, Miss Ashford. This household has been unbearable in your absence." "Thank you, Aunt Lady Margot. And please, call me Margot. If you're going to be family, we might as well dispense with formalities." She turned to her nephew. "The season's final ball is tomorrow evening. I assume you intend to make some sort of announcement?" "Several announcements, actually." Alaric's arm tightened around Carenza's waist, including one that will require a ring. The room erupted in excited chatter. Linnea threw herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in an enthusiastic embrace. Mrs. Blackwood made a sound that might have been a sniffle before retreating to organize the staff. Even Daphne, hovering near the doorway, was openly crying. In the midst of the chaos, Carenza looked up at Alaric and found him watching her with an expression of such tender wonder that her heart soared. "Are you certain?" she whispered, on low enough that only he could hear. "Society will talk. They'll say terrible things." "Let them talk." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I've spent my entire life caring about what society thinks. I'm rather looking forward to caring about something else instead. Your stepmother is powerless, and she knows it. Whatever schemes she attempts will fail, because the one thing she cannot manipulate is the truth. And the truth is that I love you, and I intend to marry you, and nothing she or anyone else says will change that." He kissed her again, properly this time, while Linnea cheered, and Lady Margot pretended to disapprove, and the library that had once belonged to a duke who believed in love transformed into the site of their beginning. And Carenza Ashford, who had been told she was not worth choosing, so I finally understood that worth was not determined by those who failed to recognize it. Worth was determined by those who did. The season's final ball at Whitmore House, the same venue where everything had begun, would now host something else entirely. She descended the grand staircase on Alaric's arm, wearing a gown of deep burgundy that Madame Colbert had rushed to complete in the day and a half since her return. The bodice was embroidered with golden thread in patterns of intertwining roses, and around her neck hung a pendant she had never seen before, an oval-cut sapphire surrounded by diamonds, passed down through 6 generations of Ashworth women. "My mother wore this at her engagement ball," Alaric had said when he clasped it around her neck. It seemed fitting. The ballroom fell silent as they appeared at the entrance, on hundreds of faces turned toward them, a sea of curiosity and speculation and barely concealed judgment. Carenza lifted her chin and smiled. Let them look. Let them whisper. Let them construct whatever narrative suited their purposes. She knew who she was. She knew what she had survived. And she knew, beyond any doubt, that the man beside her had chosen her, not despite her circumstances, but because of who those circumstances had shaped her to become. They moved through the crowd like royalty, Alaric introducing her to those she had not yet met, reintroducing her to those she had. The reactions varied, some warm, some cool, some openly hostile, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the warmth of his hand on hers, the pride in his voice when he spoke her name, and in the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the room worth seeing. Hadrian Voss appeared in their path, and for a moment, Carenza's heart clenched with old instinct. But Alaric simply nodded with cold courtesies and guided her past without stopping, as if Hadrian were beneath notice, which, she supposed, he was. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Do what?" "Ignore him so thoroughly. He'll be humiliated." "Good." Alaric's expression remained pleasant for the benefit of observers, but his voice held steel. "He deserves considerably worse than humiliation, but I'll settle for him watching you prosper and knowing he had nothing to do with it." The orchestra struck up a waltz, the same waltz they had shared at the Pemberton ball weeks ago, when everything was pretense and performance, and neither of them understood what was building between them. "May I have this dance?" Alaric asked, though they both knew it was not really a question. "You may have every dance," Carenza replied, "tonight and always." They took the floor alone, again, and this time, when the whispers erupted, they were of a different character entirely. Surprise gave way to curiosity, gave way to grudging acceptance, as it became clear that whatever was happening between the Duke of Ashworth and the former Miss Ashford was not scandal, but something else entirely. Something real. "I believe," Alaric said as they turned through the crowd, "that this is the part where I'm supposed to propose. You already proposed, in the library, with witnesses. That was a declaration. This is different." He slowed their dance. And around them, other couples stopped as well, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "This is the official version, the one society will remember." He released her and dropped to one knee in the middle of the ballroom, producing from his pocket a ring that sparkled in the chandelier light, a cluster of diamonds surrounding a central ruby that burned like a captured flame. "Carenza Ashford," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Several weeks ago, I watched a man tell you that you were not worth choosing. I intervened because I recognized a cruelty that deserved to be challenged. What I did not recognize, what I could not have anticipated, was that you would challenge me in return. You challenged my assumptions, my defenses, my determination to live half a life in the name of safety and duty." He took her hand, his amber eyes holding hers with absolute sincerity. "You taught me that survival is not the same as living, that love is worth the risk of loss, that being terrified and being brave are not mutually exclusive." His voice roughened. "You are worth choosing, Carenza. You were worth choosing the moment I met you, and you will be worth choosing every day for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" The silence stretched for a heartbeat, 2 and 3. "Yes," she said, and the word emerged stronger and surer than anything she had ever spoken. 1,000 times. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into an embrace that was thoroughly improper for a ballroom and absolutely perfect for the moment. Around them, applause erupted, tentative at first, then swelling as society decided to embrace the narrative rather than fight it. The Duke of Ashworth had chosen love over duty, passion over propriety, and there was something irresistibly romantic about a man defying expectations for a woman he barely knew. Even Lady Sabine Harcourt, watching from across the room with fury barely concealed, could not dampen the triumph of the moment. "Well done," Alaric murmured against her hair. "You've conquered London society in under 2 months. I believe that's some kind of record. I had excellent assistance. You had excellent qualities that merely required the right circumstances to reveal themselves." He gazed at her with an expression that made her heart soar. "Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face them together. That's the only promise I can make with certainty. But it's the only promise that matters." 6 months later, the wedding was everything a duke's nuptials should be. Grand, elaborate, attended by the cream of society, and nothing like anything Carenza had ever imagined for herself. She walked down the aisle of St. George's, Hanover Square, on her brother Silas's arm, wearing a gown of ivory silk that Madame Colbert had labored over for 3 months. The sapphire pendant hung at her throat, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of roses from the Ashworth Hall Conservatory, from the room where she and Linnea had become friends, where Alaric had first begun letting her see behind his walls. Alaric waited at the altar, looking slightly terrified and entirely perfect in his formal attire. When their eyes met, his expression softened into something that made her breath catch. "You are worth choosing." She had heard the words so many times now. From him, from Linnea, from Lady Margot, from the society that had once dismissed her and now clamored for her approval. But today, finally, she believed them. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and rings, and the weight of 2 lives joining into one. When Alaric kissed her, sealing their union, the congregation erupted in applause that seemed to shake the ancient stones. "Wife," he murmured against her lips, "I rather like the sound of that." "Husband, I rather like the sound of that as well." They emerged from the church to a shower of flower petals and cheering crowds. Carenza's mother wept openly, her health restored by months of proper care and the joy of watching her daughter triumph over every obstacle. Her father smiled, actually smiled, for the first time since his business had collapsed. Even Silas, who had worried endlessly about his sister's welfare, looked genuinely happy. At the reception, held in the grand ballroom of Ashworth Hall, Linnea gave a toast that made everyone laugh and several people cry. "When Carenza arrived at this house," she said, raising her glass, "she was pretending to be my friend. Within a week, she actually was. Within 2 weeks, she had made my brother fall in love with her. Within 3 weeks, she had conquered our aunt, charmed our staff, and completely transformed the atmosphere of a household that desperately needed transforming." She grinned. "If I had known being publicly humiliated was the path to happiness, I would have tried it myself long ago." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, the sound of people who had become family, celebrating a love that had defied every expectation. Later, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, Carenza found herself in the conservatory with Alaric. The moonlight filtered through glass walls, casting silver patterns across the stone floor, and the scent of jasmine hung heavy in the warm air. "I found something," Alaric said, producing a folded paper from his pocket. "Among my father's personal effects. I thought you should see it." He handed her the paper, and Carenza unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, written in a masculine hand she didn't recognize. "My dear son," it began, "if you are reading this, I have departed this world, and you now carry the weight of everything I built and everything I believed. I trust you to manage the estates, navigate Parliament, and maintain our family's position. These things you will do admirably. You were born for duty, just as I was. But duty is not enough. I learned this when I met your mother. Not your stepmother, but the woman who gave you life. She taught me that love is not a weakness to be avoided, but a strength to be cultivated. She taught me that being chosen, truly chosen, by someone who sees your flaws and loves you anyway, is the greatest gift a person can receive. I lost her too soon. The grief nearly destroyed me. But I would not trade a single day of our love to avoid that pain, because the joy of having her outweighed everything that came after. When you find your person, and you will find her, I am certain of it, do not let fear hold you back. Do not let duty overshadow choice. Do not let the ghost of my grief become a reason to avoid living fully. Choose love, my son. Choose it boldly, recklessly, against every rational argument. That is my final wish for you. Your loving father, Carenza, looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. He knew. Before he died, he knew what you needed. He always knew. Alaric's voice was rough with emotion. I just wasn't ready to hear it until you made me ready. She reached into the pocket of her gown and produced the small leather volume, Sonnets for the Unconventional Heart. The book Alaric had given her that first week. The book she had refused to leave behind even in her darkest moment. I kept it, she said softly. Even when I thought everything was over, I couldn't let go of this. Alaric took the book, turning it in his hands. My mother's favorite. And now mine. She smiled through her tears. Perhaps we should read from it. Tonight. And every anniversary after. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. A tradition worth keeping. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her heart. We should frame this. Keep it somewhere we can see it every day. In the library, perhaps, where everything began. Where everything began, she agreed. He pulled her close, and they stood together in the moonlight, two people who had found each other through accident and arrangement, and the courage to choose something real. And every year afterward, on the anniversary of the Whitmore Ball, they returned to that same venue. And not because they particularly enjoyed balls, they didn't, but because it reminded them of where their story began. A public humiliation, a duke's intervention, a woman who was told she was not worth choosing, proving to herself and the world that worth is not determined by those who failed to recognize it. Worth is determined by those who do. Thank you for listening. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming. Every comment, every share, every moment you spend with these characters matters more than you know. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romance with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.